Hey everybody, it's Doug Shelf with the Make Maine Your Home team over Remax Oceanside. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about flood zones.
Let's do this.
All right, everybody, like I said, we're going to talk about flood zones today. Flood zones are interesting here. Here in the state of Maine, we're an oceanfront state. But everywhere you're going to deal with flood zones, whether you live near lakes or wetlands and all that kind of stuff, there's a whole lot of reasons why your property could be in a flood zone. I'll tell you just a quick personal story. Where I live, a while back, I went to go get a home equity line of credit. The bank came back and said, "Hey, you're in a flood zone." I was like, "No, I'm not. I bought the house a few years ago. I'm not in a flood zone." They're like, "Nope, there's new FEMA maps and now you're in a flood zone." Behind me, there's like small body of water. As a matter of fact, it's totally dry in the fall, fills up in the winter. In the summer, it kind of drains out. My property was the only property in the neighborhood that a small corner of my property hit that flood zone that FEMA drew. A lot of these FEMA maps, somebody's looking at the maps and just circling all these bodies of water, what they think is a body of water. And there's no boots on the ground, so to speak. And the problem is what they said is like, hey, we're going to circle this. And then if you're in a flood zone, you have to do the legwork to get yourself out of the flood zone or get what they call an elevation certificate to show that you're not going to flood, and get yourself away from needing flood insurance and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, my property, a small corner, was in the flood zone, and I had to hire a surveyor. Cost me a decent chunk of money. I want to say it was like close to $3,000 that I had to pay to come out and give me what they call an elevation certificate to show that there's really no way that my property is going to flood from a 100-year storm. How they look at it is like, is this property, if we had a 100-year storm, like a big perfect storm, would this property flood? And would any damage come to the house? And then do you need flood insurance? And then the bank was like, okay, you don't need flood insurance. That's kind of part of the problem with the flood maps. So if you're ever curious, like if you're looking at property and you're like, is this in a flood zone? Your bank, if you're taking on a mortgage, a bank will pull what they call a flood certificate showing if the property is in a flood zone and what type of flood zone you're in. You can also call your insurance broker. I got a great insurance broker that we use that we could just kind of shoot an email to and say, hey, is this property in the flood zone and would it require flood insurance? If you're emailing or contacting your insurance broker, they could also give you a quote on flood insurance. Depending on what level of flood zone you're in, depending on how much of a flood zone you're in, flood insurance can be very expensive. Like if you own waterfront, you're on a beach, that's probably the prime flooding property. It can be very, very expensive, thousands of dollars a year. So you do want to make sure that you check that if you're paying cash for a property, because then there's no bank, saying, hey, you need flood insurance. If you're paying cash for something, you might want to check that and make sure that you're properly covered for a flood. Flooding here in Maine does happen. Absolutely. There's certainly towns in the state of Maine. There's a section in Saco called Camp Ellis. There's some property up in, I believe, the Pittsburgh area, Papa Beach area, that there's actually properties surveyed out that are now in the water, just because like the flooding, the shore and all that stuff has given way. So there's those properties, you can't have a house on it. I mean, the properties are in the water. These things can happen. You do want to be mindful of that. But to check to see if you need flood insurance is important. It can be very expensive, and you want to make sure you keep an eye on that. Shoreland zones and coastal zones are probably the most common areas that you're going to need flood insurance. The other areas are if there's a big, some wetlands around there that might cause flooding from a 100-year storm, chances are you're going to need flood insurance. So it's definitely something to be mindful of. And if you have any questions about it, reach out to us, comment below. We can also point you in the right direction as far as to like where to find the FEMA maps, good insurance brokers to talk to, good lenders to talk to that can give you any information that you need regarding the properties that you're looking at. So again, reach out to us, comment below. And remember, if you make Maine your home, you don't have to do it alone.